Welcome back to our creative videos. I'm Loretta Hayes from Hayes Sewing Machine Company in Wilmington, Delaware. And today we are going to do a Villa Rosa design. So this is called Bear Hugs. And I love all Villa Rosa designs because honestly, if they can tell you what to cut and how to piece the quilt up on the back of a postcard, it's going to be pretty easy to do this. And so the reason why we chose this particular quilt is there's a lot of, New Year's resolutions. I'm going to use my stash and that kind of thing. And this is just a really great modern scrap quilt. And so we're going to come, so you can see they're done with 2.5-inch strips. So you could cut these strips from your stash. If you have a jelly roll that you have not used, that you've been waiting for doing something, this would be a fabulous one to do with. If you got a not a rotary cutter, but a AccuQuilt cutter, and you want to try out the 2.5-inch die, this would be a fabulous quilt to do. So this quilt is very modern in the fact that it has a very rectangular block. So this quilt is 4 rows down, and each row contains 6 of these blocks. And so I'm going to show you how to put one of the blocks together. We'll finish out a row, and then we'll do the border. So Pam, if you want to swing around over here, this is what the Bear Hugs looks like on the pattern.
Got it.
All right. And so all of the strips are cut 2.5 inches in width. You are going to have 2 strips that are 8.5 in length. You're going to have one that's 4.5 in length, one that's 6.5 in length, and the last one is going to be a 10.5 in length. So we're going to start out by sewing together 2 of the 8.5 pieces. So we're going to go ahead, right sides together it. I have my Bernina set up with a 57 foot. So I'm going to be running the edge of the fabric right along the edge of the guide. And then off we go. And we sew this together. Now, I'm only doing 1 block just because you didn't need to see 24 blocks sewn together. That might be a little boring. However, if you were doing the quilt, I would then proceed to do the next one and chain piece them together so that you can get all of your 8.5-inch units done at one time. Once we have that done, we're going to take it over to the ironing board. We're going to press it, and we're going to press it towards the dark side.
Towards the dark
side. So we will come over here and just give it a quick press.
Should have a little sign. She's pressing.
Yes, she's right. Yes. So we now have our 8.5s put together. The next part of the block is to sew the 4.5-inch strip across the top. So we're going to place that over the top, and we're going to stitch that. So while this is not a log cabin block, it is log cabin-esque. So if you've done a log cabin block, you'll feel really, really comfortable with this. All right, so now we have our 4.5-inch block here. So the next thing to go is going to be our 8.5. And one of the things that I loved about this block is it was so obvious because when you put these together, the only log that worked was the 4.5-inch block. So if we were to try and stitch the 6.5, it's not going to work, but the 10.5 is perfect. So we're going to come in and we're going to go ahead and sew that 10.5. And that 10.5, the only thing that we want to be doing is we want that 10.5 to be sewn on the left-hand side of the block as opposed to the right-hand side of the block.
Yes, that's what it says in the picture.
That's what it says in the pattern. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. So we'll come in and we'll line up. Voila. And we'll go ahead and we'll press that. So we are almost on our block. And so we're going to come in from there. All right, last thing is to come in and attach our 6.5. So when you're looking at your 6.5 inch block, you don't want to put it down here at the bottom. That could be another pattern, but if we're staying consistent with the pattern, we're going to go ahead and we're going to attach it on the top. It almost creates a little bit of a braid kind of look to it. All right, so we'll stitch that up to the top and we will have our block complete. You will notice that this block has no matching seams.
Yay!
So Pam and I's running commentary on the quilt tack does not apply while you make the block. You are going to take and make 24 of those units. And you can see how fast it goes.
I was going to say, yeah, that's
it's
nice.
super, super fast to do. All right. So next, what we need to do is we need to lay them out. So can you swing up here so
Sure.
we can look at a row? So if you take a look, I counted my rows going across. So I have row 1, row 2, row 3, and we'll be working on row 4. So what you'll see is that on row 1, we're going to start with this at the top. Okay, this being the 6.5 inch strip.
Uh-huh.
Then the next
Oh, you
block
flipped
is
it.
going to flip upside down, and the 6.5 is going to
Got
go
it.
down. And then we're going to alternate
down,
back
up,
and
down.
forth, back and forth. When we go ahead and do the next row, it is exactly the same.
Oh,
So you're
that's
going to
nice.
start with it at the top, flip, 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 going along, and the same thing with the third, and the same thing
Nice.
with the fourth. So very, very easy layout. All I did, because this is a jelly roll, I just wanted to kind of spread things out. I didn't get overly worried if like the same fabric happened to touch. I know that there was like this one here, there was a little one that touched here or whatnot. But, you know, just as I was laying it out, I just kind of paid a little bit of attention to that. So I didn't have too many intersections of the same fabric. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get our row 4. And I always like to label up my rows. I put my tag on the left-hand side of the row to the left-hand side of the block, so I always know what direction I'm going. So you'll see that this was the last, this is the 5th block in this row, and so the 6.5 inch was at the top, and so we're going to flip this around, and we're going to go ahead and attach that.
That's nice. Yep. Nice
So
and
we'll
simple.
Line it up. And once again, when we are doing the seam, there are no seams to line up. Okey-doke. So before we head over to the ironing board to press that, we need to talk a little bit about seam allowances. So when I was pressing my first row and my third row, I pressed my seam allowances going away from the paper tab. And that's another advantage of paper tabbing it, is that you can use that for pressing. So when we came in and we did row number 2, so that we would have nice intersections on those points, I then pressed it towards the paper tab.
So this one's going to go through to the paper tab.
Correct. So for me, every time I do a quilt, if I'm labeling, I always press away from the tab, towards the tab, and away from the tab, working our way.
Cool.
So we're going to just take a quick look. We've got that going on there. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to press that towards the tab. And I always like to press from the pretty side of the fabric. I kind of hold that up. And so we'll come in and we'll press that. By pressing from the pretty side of the material, you're much less likely to get accordion pleats. And you know, if you get an accordion plate that's, you know, 1/8 of an inch, it doesn't really look like much. But if you start multiplying that out, you've got 2 blocks, you now have, you've taken up an extra 1/4 of an inch on your seam. And sometimes I think that that's where the challenge of putting rows together is, because you don't, if you're a beginner and you're not paying attention to those things, then you're thinking that your sewing is inaccurate. In reality, it's just the pressing. All right, so here's our row number 4. We're gonna unpin this. And we'll get set up for sewing our row together. So I'm going to put the big piece on the bottom just to make it convenient. And I've got my paper tab so you can take a look. We have paper tab number 3, so we've got paper tab number 4 coming. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to line up. Now, this is where Pam and I go. Could you sew this just starting from the one side and go? You absolutely could. It's a scrappy quilt. If the corners were not perfect, it would not be a crisis. However, I love my corners to line up, so I'm going to go ahead and do my little quilt tack. And there's 6 blocks, so there's 5 connections, so there's only 5 little quilt tacks to do. So if you're new to our channel and you've not done a quilt tack is normal stitch length, so 2.5 inch stitch length, and I'm sewing about 3 or 4 stitches across the seam. I pick it up, I line up my next side, and you can see that by pressing it opposite, they kind of nestle together. And so we'll line that up and we'll sew a few stitches across the seam there. And we have 2 more. And our final one. All right, so we're all quilt tacked. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up and I'm going to check out the corners. And I'm going to look at them and see if I like them. And so they're all lining up really nicely. That's looking good. Let's pull the last one just so that you can see. So let's imagine that I wasn't happy with this particular tack. I can literally come in and I can grab a hold of the thread and just pull it out, just that easily. No seam ripper, and then I can go ahead and I can realign it and put another tack in. I do 3 tacks, so like baseball, 3 strikes and you're out, right? So I'll tack and I'll be happy. I must have lost the bobbin thread. Let's make sure that we have thread.
One of those imaginary quilt tacks.
Yes, exactly. It's perfect. All right, let's try that one more time. I know it was pushing my luck when I pulled out a perfectly good one, right? There we go. All right, so we're looking good there. So I'm perfectly happy taking out a tack here or there to get my corners lined up really well. But I am not happy about taking a whole seam out. You know, sometimes you start a set of blocks and you're sewing them together, and the first part of the rows, they just line up perfectly. And then the further down the row you get, the further off you get. Mm-hmm. That's what quilt tacking will stop. It also gives us the opportunity to kind of check out and see if we have any issues with our pressing and stretching of fabric. So when I look at this, everybody's lining up pretty well except for this block here, where I've got what I refer to as a little pooch. It's pooch in here. So the rule of quilting is you always want to put the bigger piece on the bottom. So I'm going to flip this row over so that that larger piece will be on the bottom, and my feed dog will just go ahead and ease that up for me. So we'll line her up. I stitch right through the quilt tack. So the quilt tacks never come out of the quilt, they just stay as reinforcement on your quilt. And this is the block with the pooch. So just as I sew across, I'll put my hand underneath and kind of get that extra fabric lined up. And by the time I get across to my quilt tack, it's eased that up. And I won't have any tucks, nor will my corner shift off. So we are done our row, and we're just going to hop over and press, and really on this case we can press any direction we would like. I just stay consistent down the row. So we'll hop this on here. And just in getting that little bit of extra effort, can you take a look and like pan down on a corner here? Do you see how you get a really nice, you can't really tell which seam that you've done.
Nice.
All right.
It's like you've done that before.
It's like I've done that before, yeah. All right, so our last step on this particular quilt is to add our border. So the borders were cut 4.5 inches. Or actually 3.5 inches, I think. Let's double check that. 3.5 inches, I'm sorry. And so you join all of your strips together for your border. And this border, because it is a modern quilt, is only on 2 sides. Nice. So easy peasy. We're going to go ahead and we're going to line up. I want my salvage off of this quilt, so I'm going to let that hang off the edge. And we'll simply stitch down. So this quilt, as it is on the pattern, is a 42-inch width and a 48-inch length. So what's fun about this is with a 44-inch fabric, you could squeak a backing out of one length, which is super super nice. Now, if you're putting it on a long arm, you're going to need to do some piecing because you need a little extra fabric. But this is a fabulous pattern if you're doing things like charity quilts, or you need a quick quilt for a baby shower.
I would say it's a nice size.
Yeah, it's just a really nice size. It's very achievable. You know, sometimes the baby shower is, you know, this Saturday, and
We would never do that to ourselves.
no. And what sometimes happens is people who don't sew don't really know how long it takes to make a quilt. And if they know you stitch, sometimes you can offend somebody if you don't bring a quilt because that's what they're expecting from you. I like to have a couple of quilts put together, so I have in my stash, I've got kind of a traditional blue for boy, pink for girl, and then I have oftentimes a couple of neutral, kind of gender neutral ones, because oftentimes people don't know what they're going to have. But it's kind of a fun thing if you just want to do some sewing and not a lot of thinking. This is definitely the pattern, and so you can get a couple of those tucked away, ready to go, so you're not time crunched. It's a new year, right? So we're looking for a little bit more organization, a little less stress.
Mm-hmm.
No more drama. All right, we are cruising in on it. I pull my paper tabs just so I'm not going to get hooked up on those pins. We don't really need them anymore. Okey-doke. Just do a rough trim here, and then we're going to go ahead and press that.
And I assume you're pressing towards the border?
I am. It is pressing towards the light in some instances, but it also presses much flatter because the seams naturally want to go that way. If the border was white, I would be deliberate and press it the opposite way. But I think this will blend in very nicely. And then our final step is going to be to grab a rotary mat and ruler, and I'm going to lay the ruler running along the edge, and I'm going to trim off these edges here. Of course, Pam asked me this morning, do you need a mat? And I'm like, no, I'm good. So we'll do that. Let me hold up the quilt, and you can see what the total thing is going to look like.
Sorry, let me just zoom out here a little bit.
If I go backwards a little?
Yep, that looks great. That really looks pretty.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this. It's a really fun project to do, and we will see you at the next video.